James, thanks for coming.
I'm really excited to be here, man. Thank you so much for asking.
I think you, in one of your interviews, you mentioned that you started asking funny questions to spice up the show a little bit. And I
Yep.
was like, there was a period of time in my podcast where I started with a question: if there was a world apocalypse today, what would you do? And I thought it was a funny one, but then I was like, well, some guests were totally like, oh, I don't know what to say. So I had to change that.
Yeah, we like to ask ones like, what was the first concert you went to? What was your instant messenger screen name on AOL when you were growing up? What did you eat for breakfast this morning? Stuff that's like super easy to answer, but it's really light and it helps get the conversation off to a fun start.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, especially with your volume of interviews, you gotta find an effective way, right?
Yeah, right. It's we're doing a lot of them these days. So if we can figure out how to inject some fun into every one of them, I think we're doing something right.
Totally, totally. Let's start with this one. I'd be curious to know what you're gonna say. What are some of the like? What is the one thing that you wish people asked you on one of the interviews, but they never do?
Oh man, I wish people would ask me more about how we're winning on LinkedIn because we are getting we've really empowered a lot of different people on our team at this point to create content in such a way that actually gets, really massive reach. And so I don't get asked about that a whole lot, and I think it would be really valuable if somebody did.
Well, I feel like I'm probably stealing some of your approaches here, but I'm sure. But we'll talk about it. But so let's talk about LinkedIn. Let's dive into LinkedIn because I know you post a lot there. I post there quite a bit too. Um, so let's say you obviously start with creating a show. You have a podcast. You would do it for B2B brands. You have a pillar, long form type of content, and then what would you do after you have an interview to reuse that on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different things you can do. I think the lowest hanging fruit is probably micro videos. So we use a tool called Veed.io. It's Veed.io. And you can basically have somebody from your team, or you can do this, go through, listen to the interview and find clips that are between 20 seconds and 2 minutes that were compelling and really helpful pieces of content. And go and load those clips into Veed, and it will auto transcribe the captions. You can put a nice little frame around that video, and those videos do really, really well on LinkedIn. One little hack for figuring out like how, if you want to guarantee that there's going to be a good meaty piece of content in a particular episode, you can ask a question like this. You can say, hey, so and so, what is a commonly held belief around your expertise that you just passionately disagree with? And asking a question like that will get them speaking from a place of passion, and it'll get them saying something that's different than what everybody else is saying, because they're basically
Hmm.
refuting a commonly held belief. Another thing you can ask is like, hey, so and so, what should people in your space start doing today that they're probably not doing right now? And or you could ask a similar one: what should they stop doing that they probably are doing that they shouldn't be? And those types of questions get people saying things that are not just the standard same old same old. Like, if we've done 1,600 interviews on B2B growth,
Yeah.
and if I hear one more person talk about how sales and marketing needs to align, it's it's like, come on, man. Like, we've heard that. Now we got to go deeper. We got to start trying to figure out how do we extract differentiated points of
Right.
view from our guests. And I think questions like that also set up your team to be able to repurpose content really well, because it's like, hey, just go to the part of the interview where I ask these questions
Yeah.
and take their response to those questions and turn it into micro videos for LinkedIn. The other thing you can do is LinkedIn slide decks. So we have our design team that does turns a lot of our interviews into slide decks. If you go to my LinkedIn profile and just go over to
Hmm.
documents, you can see all the ones we've done in the past. We've done we've done one on Maya Grossman. We've done one on Dylan Hay. We've done one on Chris Walker. And that's another way that you can repurpose your podcast content on LinkedIn, and those decks get really good engagement. So micro videos and LinkedIn,
Totally.
and LinkedIn decks, I would say, are the two biggest opportunities right now.
It's interesting that you mentioned these questions because, I mean, effectively they are similar to what Tim Ferriss is asking, but they are angled at the business. and
Yeah.
they're very non-standard, which is great because it does bring you that different perspective.
Yeah.
With
It
regards
just
to,
sets, it
yeah,
sets people up. It sets people up to say something different. And I think that we as interviewers, the responsibility is on us to extract the best content out of our guest. And so I think using some frameworks like that, getting people to a place of saying something that is not common, or it's not what everybody else is saying, and you can phrase your question in such a way where you can actually elicit those kind of responses, and the content ends up being way better.
yeah, and I mean, you also end up, I think, like you said, lifting people up, and you're like going after Oprah
Yeah.
style. If you end up doing
Yeah.
that volume,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, shining the spotlight on other people, allowing them to share their unique perspective, and a lot of this you can figure out during the pre-interview process. So if you want to ask those questions in the pre-interview process when you're not recording, and then figure out, like, okay, you ask those three questions that I just said, like what's a commonly held belief in your
mhm,
space that you just passionately disagree with, or what's something people should start doing that they're not doing now, or what should they stop doing that they are doing but shouldn't be. You ask those three questions, they're going to give you three different responses. You can then look at those responses and say, what of those is the most differentiated, or what have we not spoken to on our show yet? Let's do
right?
an entire episode on that one response. And now you've got really granular content. So
Oh, I
you
love
took a
that.
15-minute pre-interview where you got to build a lot of relational equity with your guest, which is
Hmm.
something I talk about a lot, like using the content collaboration process as a way to actually build friendships with people, because people buy from people they know, like, and trust. So
Yeah,
use that pre-interview strategically. Ask those what we call POV discovery questions. And then once you have a point of view for your guest, now you can just pair that and build an episode around that using what we call it the what, why, how framework. But
hmm,
it's basically saying, like, what is it? What is your point of view? Why do you believe that? And why are people doing it wrong? Or, and then
yeah.
the third one is, how do you implement this? And there's different questions for each of those in the what, why, how framework. But that's the basic idea here, is like, figure out what their point of view is, and then build an episode around it so that they sound really smart.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. You know, you ask these great questions, and then by the end of the interview, people are so excited because they end up. It's like a therapy session for them.
Yes,
Besides the fact that they like to talk about themselves, which everybody does.
you're exactly right. We've found that it's just one of those things. It's like natural human behavior. Who doesn't want to? I love talking. I like you more now because you're letting me talk on your show, and so we advocate for it all day, every day, and
Right.
it's fun to be talking to somebody that gets it.
No, but absolutely. So with LinkedIn, I know you did a little bit of you know Chris Walker, of course.
Yep.
He's the LinkedIn beast now. He's getting like hundred thousands of views. So his typical play is short form videos, like you mentioned. He does also audio clips, and sometimes he does text posts,
Yeah.
pure text posts, and sometimes he does text and video, which is smart because it also hits two types of people who don't want to listen or who want to
Yeah.
just read. What do you like in terms of if you're helping a brand to run a podcast, are you also helping them repurposing all that content on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so it depends on kind of what level of service that they're working with us on, but yeah, we do a lot of that repurposing content for them, and so we're getting to see kind of how things are working in different
Right.
industries, and honestly, man, like, so much of I was talking to Chris Walker about this. We had him on the show a few months ago, and he was saying that so much of the engagement that he gets comes from the text part of the posts, even on his videos and even on his audiograms. If you are not being thoughtful about what you're putting in the text above that clip, it's going to limit your engagement. And so sometimes we get short and cute with the captions above, like the text post that goes above the
Right.
video. But most of the time we're trying to figure out, like, how can we add additional value to this content? So you can watch, Gary Vee does this really well too. You
Yeah.
can watch his videos but when you read the text above the video, you're getting additional value. It's not just regurgitating the same thing that was said in the video, which is obviously way easier to do, right? Like
Yeah.
it takes much less work to just regurgitate what's in the video up top. But if you can make it really two pieces of content that are related, we've seen that it performs way better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So those little subtle things when they come together, they're like, oh, how did that happen? Well,
Yeah.
there's a lot of science behind that.
Yep.
What about like what I found with LinkedIn is that if you push content, that's great. I mean, it performs, some of it performs well, some of it doesn't perform well. But if, let's say, you are helping a certain company and you are either helping a person from that company or a company page, if they have a limited number of connections, even if you tag the right people, sometimes that post gets pretty limited engagement. What I found is if you actually get to engage with their community, start connecting with people who like other people's posts in the same industry, that gets a massive, massive boost to
Yeah.
you and to your content you share. I'm curious, are you doing that type of stuff as well, or are you mostly focused on just the content sharing piece?
No, so we're doing a lot of engagement groups on LinkedIn, and so engagement groups are essentially they're like group chats. So it's in the messaging part of LinkedIn. So they aren't groups. Groups on LinkedIn, I think, are pretty dead. I don't know
Pretty
why
dead, yeah. Yeah.
LinkedIn. Yeah, I don't know why LinkedIn hasn't done more with them. I would love to be more involved in LinkedIn groups, but for whatever reason, LinkedIn is just not paying a lot of attention to that part of their product.
Mhm.
But in the messages part of LinkedIn, you can send messages to multiple people. And so we've actually curated a lot of different, what we call engagement groups. And essentially what the entire chat is folks sharing links to the content that they're creating on LinkedIn, and it opens up discussion. So I go into my engagement groups and I see like, okay, these are what my friends and people that I value
Mhm.
are putting out on LinkedIn. I'll click the link, I'll go and I'll give it a like, and I'll, if I've got something thoughtful to add, I'll add a comment. And by being in a lot of those groups and by putting our customers in those groups, what it's doing is it's forcing the
Right.
activity that LinkedIn wants you to have, which is you can't just be spitting out content. You need to be actively engaging with other people's content as well. And so there's this dual benefit. If you're in these engagement groups, you have lots of opportunity to engage with other people's content, and every time you engage with somebody's post, so say if I engage on your post,
Yeah.
it's like I wrote a mini post because it shows up in my connections feeds and it says James Carbary just commented on
Hmm.
Sergey Ross's post.
Right.
And so my connections see your post. So it's good for you that I commented on your post, but it's also good for me because it's giving my profile exposure to my network without me having to go and write my own posts.
Yeah.
And so there's this dual benefit that commenting on other people's posts gives. It gives you something and it gives the person whose content you're commenting on something. And so by being in these groups,
Right.
you're commenting on their stuff, they're commenting on your stuff, and it can feel a little bit like an echo chamber.
Mhm.
But you would just be shocked at how many people are seeing your content that are never saying anything. And so by doing that, by actively engaging in other people's content, you'll never know the true, like, it's I almost every week I'm hearing somebody like, oh man, I've been loving your stuff on LinkedIn. And I'm like, man, why don't you comment on any of it? Like, I didn't even know you were on LinkedIn. So yeah. So if I hope that answers your question, because LinkedIn
It does.
engagement are something that we are super passionate about, and we've seen our customers expand the reach of their content on LinkedIn significantly by being a part of them. But you can't just
Mhm.
go and post links to your stuff and not expect to engage with other
Of
people's
course.
stuff. Like the if you don't engage with other people's content, they're not going to. There's not a lot of incentive for them to engage with yours in return, and so it can feel a little bit like tit for tat, but what it does is it lets you flex you need to be engaging on the platform, and when you're around other people that are creating content, why not make it easier for yourself by bucketing those people into a group chat and say, hey, whenever you post something, put it in this group chat and let's all engage with one another's stuff. It's making it easier, and it's it's helping facilitate a behavior that the platform actually wants from you. It wants its users
Right.
engaged.
It's honestly it's a carbon copy of folks who did on Instagram back in the
Yep.
day.
Yep.
I mean, I remember I was in a couple of those groups with my friends, and it was funny because we would even fight sometimes. Oh, you didn't like my stuff; I
Yep.
liked yours.
Yep.
But it's essentially similar concept, except here you actually go a little bit deeper, where you actually leave a meaningful comment versus just hit a
Yep.
like.
Yep, exactly. And sometimes if I don't have anything to add, um, I'll just like it. And sometimes if it's a post that I'm like, man, I don't really like that, I won't like it either. So in the engagement groups that we put together, we make sure to tell people, hey, there is no requirement for you to engage with any of the content. Some people try to set rules like you have to engage with every post that's here, and I just think that's stupid.
Yeah.
You're not going to force people to engage with your stuff. It's just going to ostracize them from wanting to be a part of the group at all if they feel like they're being forced to
Right.
engage with stuff. But most of the people that I invite into these groups, I'm inviting them because I already think they're a great creator on the platform. And so more often than not, I'm going to want to engage with their stuff anyway, or I wouldn't have invited them to be a part of it in the first place.
Definitely, definitely. Do you, James, do you categorize them by groups, by industry, or by certain criteria, or do you just start with like inviting cool people that have certain similar interests?
Yeah, it used to be kind of all over the place for me. And real recently, in the last month and a half, maybe, we've started putting together groups that are focused on people that are putting out marketing content. And the reason for that for our business, it's very strategic because we sell to marketers.
Right.
So I've got a list of maybe, I don't know, 75 or 100 marketing creators on my phone. And I go through and I'll try to bucket them into 10 or 15 people at a time. And I'll reach out and say, hey, I'm putting together an engagement group. Do you want to be a part of it? But that list has taken me a long time to develop because I'm constantly on the
Hmm.
lookout for people that are creating great content on the platform. And then I add them to my list and eventually get them into an engagement group. Some people want to be a part of them. Some people don't. Just kind of depends. That these groups in the past, they can be really slimy and sleazy, and so some people just have a bad taste in their mouth. They don't want to do it. But most of the time, people are like, "Oh, I've never done this before." I've noticed that they can have a bit of once they go on for a few months, they can have some diminishing returns.
Hmm.
Some folks either burn out and they're not creating content as much as they used to. So
Right.
if you're not seeing the benefit of engagement on your content, you're likely not going to engage with others. But they still, I have not found a better tactic for getting more reach on LinkedIn than engagement groups.
Totally. I remember 3 years ago, 2017, David Cancel and Dave Gerhardt were doing it.
Yep.
They were like it was still so old though. Like
Yeah, we were producing their podcast. I think it was back then. It might have
it
been
was Seeking
2019.
Seeking Wisdom.
Yeah,
I
and
think.
we were producing their podcast and advocating like, hey, you need to start an engagement group with your team. I don't know if they're still doing that or not, but I
Mhm.
know that for a season they were. We have an internal engagement group just for our team. So anytime someone from our team posts, they put it in that group. And I don't know, it just works. And I think it, again, I go back to the fact that I think it fosters an activity that you need to be doing anyway. You
Right.
need to be engaging on other people's
Yeah.
content. One, because it's going to help you learn, like as a creator on the platform, what are other people doing that's working.
Hmm.
And it's just a way. I think it's a fun way to build deeper relationships with people.
Yeah. I mean, you have to listen to what others
Yeah.
are saying, not just like post and leave, not
Yep.
like buffer your way
Oh my
into.
gosh. And I'm so glad that the people that just load links into Buffer, like their content's not getting any reach because they're not the amount of reach that you get is directly correlated to the amount of effort that you're willing to put in. And when you just load a bunch of links into Buffer, I used to do that. That was my
Yeah.
strategy like 3 or 4
Right.
years ago.
Right.
And I got zero reach on the platform. Now I'm now investing a lot of time in creating content and engaging with other people's content. And because of that, we're now getting hundreds and hundreds of thousands of views on the platform and seeing
Right.
results.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense, right? Like, why would people stick around on LinkedIn? Like, they would not be on the platform if they pull up a feed and they see a bunch of garbage, one like
Links.
links. Exactly,
Yep.
right?
Exactly. And why would LinkedIn want to showcase content that pushes people off of their platform? It just doesn't make sense.
No, it's not how any social platform
Yeah,
works.
exactly.
James, let's talk about your bread and butter podcasts. I mean, I know that a lot of companies are sold on the idea of the fact that they need to do some sort of a show. They need to create a relationship. They need to create high quality content with B2B influencers in the area, whether it's prospects, whether it's folks who are aligned to prospects. I know a lot of them know that. What I find is difficult is production. Like, let's say you know the topic, you know the list of folks you want to reach out to, and I think, like you said, I also see the same thing. Like 80%, 90% of people agree to be on the show, and that's great if it's positioned correctly, if the name is correct. But like then we start the hard part. Like the interview is easy, and then you have so many different options on the production. You could do it in a simple way, or you could do it the Zendesk way, which probably you would say you shouldn't.
Yeah.
So talk to me about this approaches, like bare bones production, or all the way to some super fancy approach where you're actually able to create a show that is sustainable.
Yeah. So I'm obviously biased here. I'll just get that out of the way. We don't do long form narrative style podcast like what Zendesk's repeat customer was. There's a lot of podcasts that are popping up like that. The downside, one, I'll just start by saying I love those shows. Those shows
Mhm.
are super to listen to, right? Like they're really engaging. I can't wait for the next episode. Awesome. The problem with investing $30,000 to $35,000 an episode to do a show like that is that it's not sustainable. And
Mhm.
so you can do it for maybe 6 months, 8 months, but you're going to need to see a really significant return on that investment of $300,000 or $400,000 to keep going with the show that has that level of production quality. And if you're not using your show to do what we call content-based networking, I wrote an entire book about it. If you're not using your show to interview your ideal clients, then you're not going to see short-term ROI from your podcast. The only way to see short-term ROI from your podcast, in my opinion, is by interviewing people that can actually do business with you, build a friendship with them through the content
Totally.
collaboration process, and then end up working with them because they now know, like, and trust you because you did a great interview and you maintained
Right.
connection with them after the interview was over. And now they're like, oh, we actually need what you do. Oh, sweet. Like, let's work together. That's
Yeah.
how I've built Sweetfish. I mean, we're now a 7-figure business on the back of this strategy. So I know it works. But when you're doing narrative podcasts, it's more brand building and top of funnel awareness. That can work, but I've yet to find a show that has that level of production quality that has been able to sustain consistent production of the show, even on a weekly basis. And I honestly think companies should be trying to shoot for daily shows,
Oh,
because
interesting.
of how, I mean, I just think the more content you can put out, the more opportunities you have to educate and be a helpful resource for your ideal buyer. And if you're only doing a bi-weekly show, you've got 2 shots a month at being that helpful resource to
Yeah.
your buyer, where we're doing 2 or 3 episodes a day now.
Mhm.
And so now we've got multiple opportunities or at bats every single day to be a helpful resource for our customers and potential customers, as opposed to folks that are only doing a monthly or a bi-monthly, bi-weekly podcast. So anyway, I could rant on
Yeah.
this stuff all
Yeah.
day. But yeah, that's how we think about it there. So I am very biased in that I don't think high production quality is the direction that you should go there. I think you could go bare bones. I mean, I'll shoot myself in the foot here. I honestly think a lot of companies could do this on a very shoestring budget. We work with folks that are kind of in the middle. We're much cheaper than 30.
Yeah.
I don't want to say cheaper. We're much more affordable than $30,000 to
Right.
$35,000 an episode, but we're also more expensive than you just figuring out how to do it on Anchor with your mic. And like there are, there's a wide variety of ranges. We kind of sit right there in the we work with a lot of mid-market companies that aren't going to spend 30 to 35 grand an episode, but they also want it to be, a little bit more
Mm.
professional, and they want to tap into some of the strategic insights that we can add on the back end through kind of how we consult through the launch process and all that stuff. So anyway, all that to say, I don't want price to scare anybody away from this medium, because even if you have $0 for something like this, I still
Yeah.
think every B2B company on the planet should do it. Even if it's your, your own sweat, and you're just figuring out how to do it yourself using a free hosting platform like Anchor.
Right. But I mean, let's say if we are doing one interview a day, and I think that's an aggressive cadence, and it's great. What would be a format of an interview that you could, just on average, what would you could do? Let's say, would it be 20 minutes? Would it be 40 minutes? What would be what would you see that's effective?
Ours was 12 to 20. And so we go a little bit off of that now, but I mean, for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of episodes, we had a 12 to 20-minute framework. A lot of our listeners actually like that shorter episode. And then the other way that I think you can get to an interview every single day is by opening it up to where you have multiple co-hosts. So when I start telling people that they should be trying to shoot for a daily show, they look at me like I have 6 eyeballs, and I'm like, wait a minute. Don't think that one episode a day is contingent on just one host. I think you should actually have multiple people within your company co-hosting the show, and people outside of your company. So if you can partner with influencers and different people that maybe don't have a show, but they should, because they've got a lot of quality content, they've built up an audience, maybe they have a good size email list, say, hey, we've got this show. Would you like to do, a monthly episode for our show? And when we ask people to do that, they're more than happy to, because it gives them added distribution for their content, and it gives us more content. And so whether we're selling sponsorships on that content, or again, we're just trying to be the most helpful educational resource for our ideal buyers, we know that they've got good stuff to say. We've got an audience that wants to hear it. So we can stay top of mind with our buyers without us having to take on the time of doing all these interviews. So we've got like 19 different series within B2B growth. We've got a series on category creation. We've got a series on customer experience. We've got a series for agencies. We've got a series for CEOs. We've got a series called the revenue series. And so we've got all kinds of people co-hosting series on B2B growth. And because of that, we're putting out 2 or 3 episodes a day, and we're getting over 150,000 downloads a month. So we're seeing firsthand that this stuff works.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, that's such a great way. And I haven't thought of that approach, but that sounds really, really cool. Very streamlined way. What do you do? Let's say if you're producing one episode a day, obviously you're going to push it out to all the platforms that the podcast is hosted on. What about? I mean, you can do a daily LinkedIn push. That's fine. What about like email list or other channels where you shouldn't be like you wouldn't want to hit that list every day? Do you just stack them?
Yeah, so we did for a while. We stopped doing it because the guy that was writing it for us is no longer on our team, but he was doing a phenomenal job. We called it the B2B Growth Big Three. And so once a week, we were sending out an email with our 3 biggest takeaways from the podcast, from a week's worth of podcasts. Some weeks it was, 7 episodes. Some it was 9 to 10 episodes, depending on how many episodes we would do in a current day or in a given week.
Right.
But that worked really, really well. Again, the guy that was writing that, for the writer that took that on, stopped doing it, and we just haven't gone back to that. So email is one of those channels that I feel like we've got a lot of room to grow in. We're not repurposing content well enough on LinkedIn, enough on email. But that's one way to do it that we've done it in the past.
And you do and let's say this 12 to 20-minute interview, that would be an interview. This is not one person, right? You would have somebody as a guest.
Yep. We also do solo episodes, but the bulk of our interviews, or the bulk of our episodes, are interviews, 1-to-1 interviews.
How do you determine the topic? I think you had a tip that you said, which is great. You said, "Oh, look, if this is your potential prospect or your potential buyer, we're gonna reach out to them if they are a decision maker, for example, and we can ask them, oh, what is the 3 things you want to talk about in this industry?" And then they will talk about it. Genius. What about? I mean, that's great. Have you tried other approaches that to say, oh, like we really want to talk about this topic?
Yeah. So for a long time, we rode the coattails of what I'm about to share for many, many years. We've only recently developed what we call the POV discovery process, which are those 3 questions that elicit pretty good responses. And any one of those responses, you can build an episode around their idea there. But for the longest time, we would look at folks that were speaking at conferences, or that had been a guest on another podcast, or they'd written some content on LinkedIn or their company's blog. And we would go and we would say, hey, what if we did an episode about this piece of content that you've already created? So that was a good one. And then another even more simple, because a lot of people aren't creating a lot of content. We would go to them and say, hey, the show covers X, Y, and Z types of topics. Is there anything in any one of those topics that you feel like you would want to share with our audience? And we just let them come up with what the topic is. I mean, we did that for hundreds and hundreds of episodes. The issue there that we found over time was that when you put the onus on them, they don't have the context. They don't know that every other guest on your show has talked about the importance of sales and marketing alignment, because it is really important, but they don't have the context that you have as the host of the show. And
Right.
so what that ends up leading to is a lot of content that sounds very similar, with people saying the same things. So that's why we've morphed into really trying to do a separate pre-interview for every interview that we do. So instead of just doing like 5-minute pre-interview right before we hit record, we actually set up a second call. So we say, hey, it's a 15-minute call. We'll ask you a couple questions to figure out like what the topic for your episode is going to be. Those are the POV discovery questions that I mentioned earlier. And once you get answers to those questions, you as the host can go, okay, of those 3 responses, what would be the most compelling for our listeners? And then you can go and build some interview questions. Again, going back to the what, why, how framework, you can come up with 5 to 6 questions to get them to elaborate on one of the ideas that they shared during the pre-interview. And that's going to be a really solid framework. So whether you're doing a daily episode or just weekly, I think that framework of doing a standalone interview with them, or a standalone pre-interview with them, and then it makes them feel more comfortable. It makes them feel like, okay, like I know what I'm going to talk about going into this, and it positions you more as a journalist. And the more that these people can see you as a journalist that truly cares about the content that you're creating with them, the deeper the friendship is going to be with those people, the deeper the relationship is going to be, and the more trust there's going to be there. So the end result of like, hey, if there's an opportunity for us to work together, we should work together at the end of the, when you get to the end of the process, that the likelihood of that happening goes way up if you really are kind of a connoisseur of creating really great content with them.
That might sound simple, but it's genius, actually, I think. Because I was thinking while you were talking, I was thinking to all other interviews that I did, and I think, wow, like if I did that more, I did it a few times, but if I did it more, like we would have way better conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, again, it goes back to like the more time you put into something, the better the result is going to be. And so the folks that phone it in on LinkedIn and they just post links in Buffer, they're not going to see great results. And it's the same way with podcast interviews. The more effort you put in to craft a really good conversation, the better the content's going to be. And ultimately, the better the guest is going to feel about the content if you put in that work. And it's not a lot of extra work. It's a 15-minute phone call.
Yeah, it totally is. What about, I was curious to hear your thoughts, because I have struggled with this a couple of times, and would be curious to hear your perspective. When you are selecting a guest, let's say sometimes it's hard to know how deep a person can go into a topic. Sometimes they are sort of sound like an expert, but then you find out they're actually not. They don't really know. They really don't. They give you a surface level answer, which is like, oh, we follow best practices. And you're like, what the hell is this? Yeah. And then it's just hard. Like sometimes you just don't know. Would you say, if you can't find any validation, if they haven't done any shows before, they didn't do much YouTube content, would a phone call be better, or do you just drop them and look for somebody else?
No. So I think you can probably assess that in the pre-interview. So if you're doing those standalone calls and they're 15-minute calls and you ask those 3 POV discovery questions, you're going to get you're going to get something. They might not have a good answer for all three of them, but you're going to get something. And if the thing that you get is pretty weak, you can say like, hey, let me think about this. I want to try to put together the best episode we can. Let me think about this, and I'll get back to you on putting an episode together with you on this. You think about it. If you're like, man, their content was just really weak, then you can ping them and just say, hey, the more I thought about it, I don't think we had a compelling enough angle for this. Is there anything else that you think we could do here, and go that angle? Or if it's a relationship that you really want, because quite frankly, there are a lot of people we've interviewed on B2B growth. They haven't had the greatest content, but there's still relationships that we want to build because they're potential customers or potential referral partners. It doesn't hurt to have great relationships with a wide variety of people, whether they have a lot of good content in their head or not. And so you can ask if there are other people on their team that would be interested in the show that maybe do have a different perspective or something deeper to say, or you just do a short interview. And I know that that's something that, if you go back to the early days of B2B growth, you can see like when I'm doing an interview and it's only 7 minutes, it's because I just couldn't get a lot out of the guest. Part of it was I didn't have the experience as an interviewer to know the kind of questions that can elicit really great responses from basically anybody.
Yes.
But I really do think, man, asking that question, like, what is a commonly held belief in your industry or related to your expertise that you just passionately disagree with? Everybody, whether they're a thought leader or whether they've created a ton of content or not, everybody has something that they're like, man, everybody believes this, but I think this. Like,
oh, it's fantastic.
It's baffling. When you start asking that question, you'll figure it out. Like, oh man, like people really have an opinion.
I love it. I love it. I mean, I'm definitely adding it to my roster.
Yeah.
What was it like to hang out with Gary Vee?
Oh man, that guy is so freaking genuine. He is like my entrepreneurial idol. And I was honestly nervous getting to interview him a few years ago. And I was like, man, I just really don't want him to be a dickhead because I look up to this guy so much. And if he's a dick, it's just really gonna suck. And he was just so thoughtful. He was so zoned in. Like we had an hour blocked with him. And so my buddy, Jeremy, got to do an interview with him for about 45 minutes. And I got to do an interview with him for about 15 minutes. And he was just so focused on us, so engaged. You know that his phone was buzzing 8 million times during that hour. He didn't look at his phone. He was just completely focused on us and trying to deliver as much value as he could in the hour that he had with us. And so my experience was that he is incredibly genuine and incredibly thoughtful as well. So I had a great experience with him.
Yeah, he's really cool. I mean, it blows my mind, to be honest, to see how much value he actually has in the content. And if people actually listen to it and apply it, it's insane.
Yeah, it really is. Like, I mean, I credit his content to the lion's share of the success that we've had in the business. I mean, you see these posters back here, the clouds in the dirt, this positivity always wins thing up here. Like, I mean, basically got a shrine in my office to Gary Vee. I've got all of his books right up there. So I cannot say enough good things about the impact that man has had on my life. Because I would not have been able to build the business that I've been able to build without his influence.
No, absolutely. He's such an inspiration. Totally. You mentioned something that really caught my attention. You were talking to Gaetano from Nextiva, the guy who does Demand Gen Live with Chris Walker now last year, and you mentioned something about your purpose, where are you spending the time helping B2B businesses build podcasts, and whether it's the right thing to do from the impact perspective. So you're not saving lives. And I thought this is really interesting because I think about that a lot too. Has your perspective changed right now, or what are your thoughts at the moment?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. This is a really good question. It's something I've continued to think a lot about, and I'm a Christ follower, so I'm a Christian, and I am a huge advocate for adoption. I think the orphan crisis is real. I think way too many kids are growing up in the foster care system, which here in the States is I don't know that I've ever talked to anybody that had a
Hmm.
good thing to say about being raised in the foster care system. There are a lot of well-meaning families that want to be foster care hosts, but the system itself, I think, is very broken, and it does not produce a good outcome. And so I've become very passionate about adoption, and particularly really empowering the body of believers of Christians to adopt and to bring children into their home. And so I want to fund 1 million adoptions by the end of my lifetime. And so I've been doing a lot of thinking. I was actually just talking to our creative director yesterday. We are starting an organization, a nonprofit called the Adoption Fund. And we're in true Sweetfish style. We're starting a media property tied to that called Young Married Christian. And so we're starting to make some progress on
Hmm.
developing what really, from a purpose perspective, I feel like God's put me on the planet to do,
Right.
which is fund these adoptions. And the way I look at my business is my way of funding and making that reality happen. So I don't expect to fund 1 million adoptions with my own money or with just
Yeah.
the business. We want to build something where we're basically crowdsourcing, and we're going to have lots and lots of people paying 10, 20, 30 bucks a month to help us fund all of these adoptions. But that's really where my purpose is at right now, and what I'm focused on. So I know that I need to balance the focus on the business, the thing that's going to allow me to live
Right.
generously, and fuel the work that I want to do outside of the business as well. And that's how I'm thinking about it. It's build the business, but I don't need to wait, because you can always put it off, right? Like I've
Yeah.
put it off for years and said like, oh, I got to focus on the business. I got to focus on the business. I got to focus on the business. And I finally this year just said, you know what? I'm going to continue to focus on the business, but I've got to start taking steps toward what I truly feel like God's calling me to. And that's funding a whole
Yeah.
bunch of adoptions. And if I look up in 30 years and I still haven't done it because I'm still focused on growing the business, I just don't want that to be my story. And so that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. That's really profound. James, is there anything I have missed in the conversation you'd like to add? Any final messages to the audience?
Man, Sergey, you mentioned something earlier that I don't. You said something really, really smart and strategic that I don't want to gloss over. You talked about the importance of naming your show, and that is honestly the biggest mistake that we see B2B companies making. They try to name their show after their company name, after one of their core values, after a marketing tagline. And when you have a show name that's cute and fancy, one, people aren't searching for that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever they're listening to podcasts. So you're missing out on a massive channel because people aren't searching for your tagline or your company name whenever they're looking for podcasts. They're looking for their industry, or a specific problem that they're trying
A
to
certain
solve.
keyword potentially, right?
Yeah, exactly. So being more strategic with your show name, and then also it's not authoritative. When you get cute and fancy with your show name, it doesn't communicate any sort of authority. So we've got a show called the Manufacturing Show. Well, that show has a lot of authority just because of its name, and it's got a good piece of podcast cover art. And so be thinking through in terms of authority, and being clear, concise, and optimizing that name for search. People are searching manufacturing in
Right.
podcast players. They're going to find us. The reason B2B growth has grown to have the audience that we have today is because we rank for the keyword B2B and B2B marketing inside of Apple Podcasts. That's a huge channel for growth, for audience growth when it comes to your podcast, because obviously people are
Yeah.
going to these players. They're going to Spotify, they're going to Apple Podcasts, they're going to Google Podcasts, and they're searching for the types of shows that they want to look for. Your show should pop up there.
Yeah.
But when you get cute and fancy and you name it after one of your values or your company name, you're not going to show up where searchers are looking for you to show up, and you're going to miss out on an opportunity to help those people and ultimately win business.
as somebody who named my first show after my first name and last name, I can say this is huge.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
just such a big point.
Yep. We see it all the time, man. We've got a slide deck that we now send to all of our new customers ahead of the call that we do with them to figure out the name of their show. And we talk, don't name it after your personal brand. Don't name it after a marketing tagline. Don't name it after one of your core values, and definitely don't name it after your company name. And still,
Right.
we see
Yeah.
folks still continuing to do that.
There's a lot of
And
ego. There's a lot of
yeah,
ego.
a
Always.
lot of
Always.
ego, a lot of
James,
ego.
James, where's everybody can find you online?
Yeah. So LinkedIn, James Carbary, Carbary. My email is james@sweetfishmedia.com. If anybody wants to reach out, I love jamming on this stuff. And happy to talk to anybody and everybody.
Well, we'll link it in the show notes so everybody can go check out the awesome stuff you're doing. But James, it was awesome to talk to you. Thank you for coming.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Sergey. This has been fun. Really appreciate it.